Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm sorry, I have an echo here. All right. Hi, welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that you all joined us today, and we are thrilled that you are here. And we were thinking what would be the most valuable program for our upper level ticket holders. We knew that Melanie Shaffer had to be involved. She was generous enough to recruit Patti Johnson to be part of today's session, and you are in for a real treat. D Magazine Partners has been working with Melanie and her team at TalentSuite as we invested in new behavioral tools and strategy for hiring, management, and our internal teams. They have been invaluable in helping us get more rigorous, thoughtful, and intentional about our new hiring. And they are great coaches for helping us think through people and strategy challenges. Patti Johnson's extensive bio can be found in your digital program, but she's the founder and CEO of PeopleResults and consults and advises ranges of corporations in change management, best-selling authors, and serves as the board of directors for Perivia Solutions. I can't imagine two better women having to share their insights, and our goal is to make session as interactive as possible. So please continue to chime in on the chat so they can address your questions. And we hope that everyone had an opportunity to complete the predictive index assessment. We'll be sure to get your link again, and TalentSuite team will be looking forward to following up accordingly. Take it away, Melanie and Patti, and thank you again.
Thank you. We have some big shoes to fill here. There have been some phenomenal women speaking with you today that I've been able to participate in. So we're really excited to be here together. And when Patti and I were talking about this, Patti has a phenomenal why and such deep change management expertise that I would love to find out from you, Patti. We kind of talked some about this offline, but what is your why for your passion around helping organizations navigate change?
Well, I think all of us right now, especially, can relate to the discomfort that change brings, but it's also, there's opportunity, and that, just that ability to help people bust through it, see the opportunity, and make the change in their behavior and their life to get where they want to go. I think that is sort of been my lifelong work and career. Really kind of comes down to that, honestly. So hopefully today we'll give some good ideas and suggestions for everyone who's participating.
Yeah, and we're so thankful that you were able to join us to share your expertise and really kind of the learnings she's had from the results of research that were published in her book. So thank you for joining us. And my why, as far as why I'm here with all of you today, is I'm kind of a change magnet. And when I learned in my career that everybody moves through change differently, that was literally a life-altering experience for me of stepping back and understanding through the lens of others what they need to move through change. And that really inspired me to be able to bring that same level of understanding to others so that we could all figure out how to meet in the middle and devise the best ways for all of us to navigate change together. So I'm going to jump in here, and Patti and I were really collaborating on what we were going to be talking about today because we were curating and really culling down to a short period of time. What can we really share with you that helps you navigate this year that none of us anticipated? And Patti had this thought as we were talking about rubber bands. And as we were talking about clients and all the conversations that we've been having with people, it's really all about waiting for that band to snap back. And I think we've all realized that's not happening. And so what we want to be able to do today is prepare you to think about how can you really quickly identify how to move through change, not just for yourself, because I saw questions coming up in a lot of the other speakers about how do you get other people to come with you? What do you do if there's friction between you and someone else that's blocking productivity and change? How do you help understand what other people need so that we can get unstuck and get people unfrozen to move into taking action right now, because everybody's really scared. So we want to address some of that and talk through that. And so, Patti, will you talk with us about some of the changes that we weren't expecting that now are here to stay?
Sure, of course. Well, I feel like we've all been talking about the need to be more agile and comfortable in ambiguity. I mean, how long have we been talking about that? Well, here we are, everyone. I mean, this year, more than any year that I can ever remember, is just bringing dramatic change and accelerated change. So I just want to mention a few of those things that really, if you think back to February 1st, let's pick that date. If we knew what was ahead of us right now and what we'd be dealing with come July, we wouldn't have believed it. So let's think about that. We kind of believe there's not going to be the snapback. We're not going to be returned to normal. But in the context of thinking about how we adapt to this change, let's just think a minute about what's happening around us that is going to change our world. And I'm not going to go through each of these, but I just want to mention a few of them. One is everything being virtual. Now, many of you, I know I have had the option of working virtually 15 years. So working virtually is not new for me. But the fact now everything is virtual. This conference, a year ago, if somebody would have suggested, let's do this virtually, it would have been, that's not possible. Yet here we are. And you guys are experiencing the same thing in terms of leadership meetings and workshops and all those things you always thought you had to be in person. You're now relying on virtual, and it's working. So one thing I would say to you, for those of you that have been advocates for yourself, for your teams, of having more virtual options, work from home options, well, we probably made the business case for you right here because we're doing it. Travel, wow, there's a huge impact on travel, as you all know. But think about it. What's it going to be like once we get through this a little bit more? My view is we are not going to return to the same travel standard that we had before. I mean, I'm sure all of you, you've had the experience of you've traveled overnight for the 3-hour meeting. I'm not sure we're going to be doing that again. So I think there's been a lot of cost savings. There's been a lot of efficiency. I think there's going to be a desire to hang on to some of that.
Yeah.
Collaboration. We're using technology to collaborate. What used to be optional is now it has to be. This is the way it has to be. Also, diversity, inclusion, belonging. What's happened in the last 6 weeks, 2 months has been just unbelievable. The acceleration and change of views and better understanding. And I know a lot of organizations, you're having panels and hearing about the Black experience and what it's been like, really what it's been like. And I feel that, and we're all here for the advancement, retention of women, that whole space is going to just change exponentially. Where a lot in the past, maybe it was a training program, maybe it was looking at hiring metrics. I think now we're going to shift to another way in our organization at PeopleResults. The way we think about it is this is now this whole inclusion and belonging. It's an organizational change. It's a transformation. It's your whole system and structure. What needs to be different now to really change the experience in your organization? So those are a few. We can talk more. All of you, you've seen your own things, but I just want to set it up here that we're really entering a new era, a new territory. So all your old playbooks that really were great in 2018, you might need to set those aside and really start to think about your own behavior and the behavior of your team, because it's a new space.
Yeah, that's a great segue into our next thought, which is really moving into resilience. And so I know there are specific folks speaking about this, but as far as transitioning us into what we're going to be talking about today, we love this information that we saw in Inc. about the 3 things that resilient organizations are all focused on moving towards right now. And the first is really recognizing what you said, Patti, that the remote work is actually going to become a competitive advantage, and that will provide opportunities to employers around change. It will also provide a lot of focus and spotlight that now has to be shown on retention, because all of a sudden your star players are not limited by geography. So there's so much we could talk about just in that one. And then you talked about collaboration and really having to have more self-awareness of others, because if you're doing it virtually, people may not have that psychological safety that they would have in person to feel comfortable to speak up if they disagree or if they have input to share and they're not being asked to share it. And then looking for ways to be more efficient, because now there's no more excuses. We are remote, we have the technology, and so we've got to capitalize on it. And so how we focus in thinking about really what we're driving towards falls within this discipline of talent optimization. And I show you this model because it's very simple, and I'm all about trying to boil things down into some really simple pieces because we're all busy and scattered, moving through this and looking at this model of, what's changed? Where are we going? Because none of us expected to be resetting our strategy for our total organization or our team in the middle of the year, but here we are. And we probably had results that we were looking to achieve at the beginning of the year that have completely changed, and we're having to reset our expectations. Where sometimes organizations need help is this piece we like to call the messy middle, which is the execution of getting from strategy to results through people. And so for purposes of today, we're really going to be talking a lot about design of how do you ensure that you have a clear understanding of what people on your team need to move through change, and how do you have a better way of thinking about, regardless of how they're wired as a whole, moving through that change. Because when we're moving through change, and really when we're thinking about the workplace, the whole person shows up at work. So a lot of you took the predictive index survey that was sent out, and you're going to be able to see where you fall out in the data that we're going to be showing. And that's what we really use to understand people's motivating needs, motivating drives. And so that's this head piece. But what you have to consider in change is really the whole person that shows up at work. What are their values? There's so much of the heart right now we have to take care of because people are tender. And there's a lot that needs to be unpacked there in moving through change, in addition to being able to better address their needs and how they're motivated to move through it. But also, what have they learned? Some of the things they've learned, Patti and I talked about this, are great and are going to help them move through this change. Some things have to be unlearned. And so we really have to consider the whole person when we're thinking about how do we work most productively with them and get them to follow us through change. Patti, so in talking about how people move through change, regardless of their own needs and wiring, what are things that tend to get in the way with your change management experience?
Sure. If you look at research, and if you also look, I wrote Make Waves, Be the One to Start Change at Work and in Life a few years ago, and did a ton of research and talking to people who had worked through and been successful and started changes. Here are a few. There are some things roadblocks that can get in our way. And I want to just mention about 3 of them. The first one is fear. Now, this is my son, Patrick. He is skydiving. No, thank you. You'll not see my picture doing this, but it's funny. I'm not really talking about the fear of skydiving, snakes, public speaking for some people. Those are things we would all nod and say, that's scary. Okay. But I'm not really even talking about that kind of fear. What I want you to think about today is the fear that you carry with you inside your little personal backpack that nobody can see. So what are your triggers? Is it a fear of being wrong? Maybe it is a fear of not being appreciated, not being right, not having the answers. Like deep down, what are your fears? I know for those of you who are the Brene Brown fans, she always has the, she always asks you the question of what are you most vulnerable about? And this will give you your signal. I'm not blank enough. If you can answer that question, then you will know what's going to trip up on you, because what's happening in change, you're bumping up against a whole lot of uncertainty. So that's the first one. Make sure you know within yourself what that is. The second one I want to mention is perfectionism. Any perfectionists out there? I have a feeling we have some. I know I can relate to it. If you're one of those people, it needs to be right. It's got to be perfect. then here you are, and you're going to have some conflicts coming up against this big change like what we're in right now. Now, statistically, research would say as women, there are more perfectionists as women than men. We are the ones that want to hit 90% of the qualifications before we say we're ready, versus the men have a lower percentage. They feel like they can figure it out. Now, that's a big stereotype. Not all of us are that way, but perfectionism can really trip us up in a change, because if you've grown up wanting to be that A+ student, get everything right, be perfect, what are you doing in the middle of a change? Is that possible? Actually, it's not, because the answers are not all clear. It's not a formula. And so being aware enough to know I have that tendency, but I'm going to have to lower my standard in what is good enough for me right now. So we'll talk more about some strategies in a minute, but that's a big watch out. And it's one I personally can relate to in battle often, because you're not going to have all the answers. You're just not. The last one that I want to call out that's very common is familiarity. Now, familiarity, it's a little bit like that little cozy sweater you like to put on. It feels good. But what do we know about change? Change brings discomfort. Yet we like the predictable. We like understanding and knowing what's going to happen. So this is a reason why you might stay in a job longer than you know you should, like you know you've outgrown it, but at least it's not the best option, but it's the familiar option. I'm going to stay with it. Stay in a relationship that you know is not going to work. Or I don't know if any of you can relate, you have a team member having performance issues, don't want to face it. And actually dealing with somebody that's not performing well feels better than actually stepping out and creating the change. So this is an example of where, staying stuck because it's familiar feels like it's safer and better at the moment, but it's basically kicking it down the hill. And what do we know about when you kick something down the hill? It picks up momentum and it picks up speed, and it's going to be there eventually. So those are 3 watch outs that I would say to think about your own behaviors. Or do any of those feel familiar to you? Do any of those feel common and likely to affect your ability to jump into a completely new space?
Yeah, I love that. And I think, all of us have a lot of those 3 areas that really can limit us. And we're going to talk about that, some people naturally have drives that create needs that make some of those 3 areas even more prickly for them, because they have a strong need for perfectionism, more so through how they're driven. So you have your predictive index data, and if you want to pull your report out, we're going to be going into some specifics of how we apply this in change management. And of course, if you have behavioral data that you use in your organization, you can still apply what we're going to talk about as ways of thinking about people on your team. We use predictive index because it is predictive. So the point of predictive index and applying it to change management is that if we can measure your drives, we can predict behaviors. Now, you can't change behavior. What you can change is how you feed people's needs. So the gold in this instrument that we apply is the ability to understand how to feed people's needs. And that is what changes behavior, because behavior is actually a response to a need either being met or not being met. So we're going to talk about that as we move through this. And why is that important to understand what motivates and drives us? Because you may say, well, I kind of know that. And maybe you do, and that's fantastic. I've taken at this point in my life, probably 25 psychometrics, and I'm really not kidding. But the real value as a leader comes in helping your team understand this. And what's really interesting is there's research out there, and this is a TED Talk for those of you that want even more speaking action after today, by Tasha Eurich, who conducted a 5-year research study with over 5,000 participants on self-awareness. And she does this TED Talk about it. And it's fascinating because she defines self-awareness in 2 ways. One is your own drives, needs, and behaviors, understanding those. The second part is understanding how those impact others. And so if you think about it from that definition, I'm used to speaking live where I can ask the audience this question. We take all kinds of fun guesses on this, but I'm just going to share it with you to keep us moving. But the study actually found that 95% of people thought they were self-aware, but in actuality, only 15% are. And so, Patti and I were kind of talking about this before, that in change, the things that made us great and were our superpowers when we're in typical times can often become our kryptonite in keeping us from being able to collaborate with others and move through change. What are your thoughts on that, Patti?
No, I agree. And I think that, back at the beginning, you talked about the whole person. When you're thinking about the briefcase, the heart, the mind, there's a lot happening there. And depending on the situation, you may be relying on more one thing than the other.
Absolutely. So we need as many sets of data at our fingertips as you can. All right. So now we're going to have a little fun. We're going to have you look at your PI profiles. And so if you took the PI beforehand, great. If you didn't, don't worry. We're going to be sending an email with a summary of what Patti and I are providing on tangible takeaways and the ability to take it. But if you've taken it, look at your top left corner on your first page, your PI report, and your data is organized by 17 different what we call reference profiles, which are really a big picture snapshot of kind of what motivates you. And we've done research and application with this data to really kind of group profiles into 3 categories of how they move through change, what their needs are to move through it, and kind of what their roles tend to be. And this is the head part of it. So of course, people learn how to compensate with briefcase, and they may have a work ethic that sometimes can even grind outside some of who they are. But in thinking about change, it's really important at the onset to have information around what your team needs and how to orchestrate them to move through it. And so in the PI profiles, we have 3 different categories of how people move through change and where they can have active roles in the team to really bring it all together successfully. We're going to go into depth on each of these, but just for now, look at your profile and see where you fall out. Patti and I happen to fall into the champions category, probably why we're both so passionate about change, because sometimes we look for it even when it may not be necessary, right, Patti?
Yes, this is true.
And then the catalyst, that's the rarest reference profile, and often the most important because they are the bridge to the challengers. And when I say challengers, I want to make sure that we're not thinking of that as an assertive, negative way. When we say challengers to change, that can actually be a very positive thing, because they're the people looking around corners, and we really want them bought in early. And we're going to talk some more about that. But the challengers are the people that want more information. And we're going to talk about kind of the overall role these people play in change. But before we do that, it's helpful to really kind of talk about the change model and kind of emotionally how people process through change. Patti, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, I think there are a number of change curves you've seen out there. This is one of them. And it feels like, in change, when we work with our clients, both as an organization and individually, the goal is to get people to move through that change curve, to make it easy, accelerate the move through that change curve. But there are a few things that are worth thinking about here. If you think about your own personal behavior, number one, much like grief, this is not linear, right? So you might feel like, wow, I'm thinking about the future. I'm feeling good one day, and then there's new information, or maybe just the way you personally feel, you slide back. You're back over in frustration category. So it's not like step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So as human beings, that's just realistic. You're never going to automatically get to one phase and always stay there. I think the other thing that we're thinking about here is that everybody kind of goes through this differently. We are all different. Someone might start off, hear new information, be surprised about the reorganization, the big changes. They might be fully over to decision and integration within 24 hours. Comfortable with change, kind of get it, ready to go. It may take somebody else 3 months. So that's important for you to know, is what is my natural speed at accepting new change? And secondly, again, a lot of our conversations with clients are about how do you actually help people get from denial over to decision? There are some strategies for that. We don't have time to talk about that today, but that's the goal. We're all different. Also, I want to point out that depression, that's a very powerful word. Think of that also as, it could also be just feeling like this is never going to work. I just, I don't know what we're going to do. It's that middle ground between thinking about the past and about the future. That actually can be a positive place to be, because it looks like it's never going to get better. That means you're also processing that I can't live in the past anymore. I can't deny it's not happening. I've got to figure out, how am I going to start moving toward the future? So often, back to, as we said, discomfort can really create change in our lives, cause us to have the energy to create change. If you are there, that means you may be ready to start to look toward the future. So just some context around this, because as we're talking about individual behaviors and profiles, just know that this is not a one size fits all linear progression. So we wanted you to have that context as we talk through this.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I feel like no matter our behavioral wiring, at different days, you get out of bed feeling different ways.
True.
I so associate with this curve because I'm all over the place right now. So thank you for providing some color for us to understand how we process change. So in thinking about how we bring data into looking at change and looking at a team in moving through change, we like to really talk about, bringing people together, like building a bridge. And so, we have our champions that are those people on our team that, are going to mobilize right away. And like Patti said, maybe they're motivated all the time for change. And so they're ready to start hanging the ropes and building out kind of the top line infrastructure and kind of getting the big picture in place. But it's hard for anything to progress until we have a plan of how do we build the road? How do we actually get across from one point to the other? The how people that partner with the champions to really build out that road. And then we have the challengers that are sometimes the most important part of change, because without them, we don't know the obstacles. Without them, we don't necessarily know how to anticipate problems. And they are the implementers that are going to ultimately make the bridge supported and overall make the change sustainable. So all three are critical to have their part and their role in moving through it. And so the goal is really understanding quickly, how to start moving through it. So quickly, as it relates to what Patti talked about, we're all going to move through this, and not in a linear format. But if you're thinking about kind of the first instinct someone has when change is thrust upon them, and we put them on the change curve, these champions tend to, want to jump right into it and almost start experimenting. And we're going to talk about where that's good and where that can potentially cause problems, both as a leader and as a team member. Our catalysts. These are the people that, okay, we're open to some change, but we really need some more information to make sure that the change is structured in a way that's going to be successful. And then we've got the challengers that gather a lot of their energy from what is known. So facts, data, information. And so, we're going to need to message differently with them, communicate differently with them. And Patti has some things that we talked about before that I want to have her share once I talk about each of the three, and some things to consider in what they bring to the team and then also where they have potential areas that may need to be considered. Self-aware as the leader, and also as the leader of having this information about the team. So let's first talk about the champions. So these typically are kind of our centers of influence that are going to jump right into change. They're going to want to bring people quickly with them. They may not, though, always provide all the information that other people need. And they really are usually less interested in the structure, more about, the change and the idea and kind of rallying people to, start moving through it. So, a lot of leaders, Patti was talking about this, tend to fall in these categories of having information at different rates than the people that they're trying to bring with them. And so, Patti, when you think about people that tend to, and you can speak from firsthand knowledge since you and I are these people, what are some of the things people on here should consider if either they are a champion or if they think they have some people on their team like this?
Sure. So an important part of change is always realizing, where am I and where are the people around me? And again, if you're looking at a good change program, that's a key element. And so it may be just personally, we're more comfortable with faster change. It may also be, how many times have we all been part of a leadership group working on a big change? You've had 2 months to process it, think it through, know what you're going to do. Then all of a sudden you're turning and you're talking to your team about it. And they're like, wait, whoa, how's this going to work? What? And you forget you were there once too, but you've moved beyond it. You're into execution mode. So I think it's also important, not only in terms of style, but where are you in terms of your level of knowledge? If you've been involved in something for a couple of months, it's just not that big of a deal to you. It's not like it was that first couple of days. So recognizing that as well.
I love that. I love that. So in thinking about our catalysts, these are the people that are that thought partner that we want to get in early because they are interested in change, but they're interested in change with a plan. And so, they really can be a great advocate if there's awareness on the team. I found oftentimes in working with teams, there can be tension here between the champions and the catalyst if there's not clarity of understanding around why we're seeing some of this pushback from the catalyst with the champions. So you can see here, there are people that are very organized, very precise. They love pressure, but they really want to have a plan to move through how we're going to get this done right. And these people suffer potentially more of some of the overarching pieces of change that Patti talked about at the beginning with the perfectionism, because before they move on the change, they really want to know all of the information and the plan. So having these people identified early on is really critical in change efforts, because they are that intermediary that then allows us to bring along our challengers. And our challengers are people that are really wired for bringing all of the information. There are researchers. They are thorough and thoughtful and deliberative. But as far as potential blind spots, if they haven't been through the change before, they may say, well, I haven't seen that, or that won't work. And, if they're not brought into conversations early on, what I've seen in teams is they tend to shut down and disengage because they feel like their needs are not being honored. They feel like this is just willy-nilly, so I'm out. I'm just going to go all the way back over to shock in the change curve. Patti, what are your thoughts here?
Yes, I think in a change, you need these challengers. Sometimes your tendency, if you have a change, you're over here, you're going, I got to figure out the big picture. What are we going to do? How's this going to go? Attention to detail might feel frustrating to you. I would encourage you that, the most common question I get when I speak with clients or at conferences or whatever is resistance. What about, I'm getting all this resistance. I have all these great ideas, but not everybody's with me. Often the challengers may feel like they are resistors. So bring them into the tent. ask them to be involved in it. There are people, you all know who they are, that you work with. They are permanent resistors. They're permanent challengers. That's just who they are. They're skeptics. That's okay. You know who those people are, but the others, and with the others, bring them in. And one of the strategies I think is a great one for somebody who is in the that won't work mentality is to help them understand why the change is happening and then ask questions. What do you recommend? What do you think we should do? And help them move back to our change curve. Think for the future and not think about, well, we've never done it that way. I don't think we can do it. So that can be a good strategy for getting those challengers, because they are critical. They are critical to making sure that when you get ready to implement that change, you've thought it through and it's going to work. They are important.
Yeah, and that they're committed, right?
Sure.
Because if the whole team's not committed, it's not going to happen. So I love what you said there about shifting. Instead of judgment, we're shifting to curiosity.
Right.
We want them at the onset. And as someone that's a champion, I'll be vulnerable and admit that one of my biggest areas that I constantly struggle with is involving the challengers at the onset, because I almost don't want to be told that my idea is not good. I don't want holes poked in what we're doing. I've figured it out. So it's knowing yourself and being willing to be open to saying, help me see like what might be happening here, and intentionally asking these challengers for their input and getting them engaged early on. So that was spot on, Patti. I absolutely love it. So let's quickly talk about, an actual case study so you can see some live data. So this is a company that we worked with, a leadership team after a merger. And this leadership team was a result of two very different cultures coming together. And you can see that our champions over here, the leader of the entire group that was appointed after this merger occurred, was up here in innovation and agility, because now we need to capitalize on our investment, right? So we have got this change agent in here who's wheeling and dealing. And he came to me because he said, oh my gosh, Melanie, like, I can't get this team to come with me and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I need you to help me. So we used the data to really look at the team and where they fell out between the champions and the challengers and the catalysts. And we had some amazing insights. The first was we had one really tired person, that really was kind of the intermediary to communicating what was going on in the group and really playing, some of both sides of the fences. We also had a lot of people that felt like they were completely disregarded. The feedback when we sent out, 360 was, no one's asked our opinion. We went through this merger and now all these things are being thrust on us without clarity, without details, without timelines, without structure. And it was really insightful for all of them to have this data to understand what they all needed to be able to move together. So the way we helped them in restructuring how they worked was really putting some specific processes in place that met in the middle of where they all wanted to be. And it wasn't a win completely for one side or the other, but we've got to figure out a way to work together and move forward and monetize that investment. So that was working really well. Then COVID hit. And so the really interesting part of them having this data before COVID was the ability to now see way more value in these people that have been really focused on preservation, risk management, really going in and figuring out how do we ensure that we survive. So these risk mitigators now are kind of front and center having their day. And the beauty of it is because the leader had recognized before all of this the value that brings, he's allowed them to step up and take charge and moved over to being more of that kind of collaborator, team cohesion focused leader. So it's really played out beautifully. So in thinking about leading through change, we want to leave you with some overall strategies. And in thinking about this portion we've talked about of applying people data predictively to know where your players fall, the strategies would be number one, you have to assess your whole team to know where they fall. And then number two, looking at these buckets of, ensuring you've tapped these centers of influence, these champions, to lead through, but also that they're aligned to the plan, right? We want them bought in, and we want them to have clarity on what change is most important. On our catalysts, we want to honor their need to know how, and really put a spotlight on that and partner them early on with our champions. And then with our challengers, we want to message differently to them early on. And like Patti said, it needs to be more frequent. And what's really interesting about the challengers, it's not just the how that they want, it's more specific messaging, but it's the why. Why now? Why are we doing it this way? They are going to have a much easier time getting on the bus and moving quickly with you if those needs are being met. Patti, now we're going to talk about the neuroscience piece of change.
Let me just we want to give you all a few practical tips. Now, the whole neuroscience topic, we could spend a day on.
My gosh, that'd be so fun.
Yes, I'd be up for that. So we'll plan that. But I do think one thing that's very important to remember for those of you out there who are feeling some anxiety, even if you're pretty comfortable with change, maybe that is a natural go-to, but right now it feels even more personal. It's because think about your brain is a giant prediction machine, and there's a lot of effort toward that. And right now it is very hard to pull off its work, right? So if you're feeling that uncertainty and it's starting, it feels like I'm not getting that sense of reward of being able to anticipate, just know that's normal, right? That is a part of what we're all experiencing right now. And with that, I want to just give you all a few tips, practical takeaways, regardless of which of the profiles you fall into, that I think are really relevant if you are an agile change leader. The first one, start, go. We talked about perfectionism. You cannot wait until you have all the information. Your brain might want you to, you can't, what's going to happen? You're stuck. So I think a really important question is to right now ask yourself, what can I do right now? What can I do this week that's going to move me forward? It doesn't mean you've set your path for the next 6 months. It means you are beginning, you are stepping out there. The second tip that I would give you is experiment with a deadline. When I mentioned earlier the book that I wrote, and in interviewing all these people who have been really successful in starting changes in all walks of life, and I look at our clients who can move the needle, this is a big one. And to me, it is highly underutilized. Experiment with a deadline means try some stuff, see what works, learn from it. We are all used to having the big program all figured out, and we go out and we go, ta-da, here it is, everyone, and it's perfect. Try a different approach. Try a little small scale in one office, in one little team. Let's try this and learn from it. And if it works, push it out. Tell people it's an experiment. Might work, might not. We're going to try it. Where can you use experimentation in your change and what's happening in your organization to see where you can actually take it to the next step? The third one, the chameleon, agile planning is something, again, we've talked about in our world. We talk about it all the time with our clients about, agile change. Well, this is the ultimate case study of case studies, is what we're doing right now. And what that means is, I think if you've been the person that you love the 6-month plan and you've got, 300, rows on your Excel spreadsheet, and you don't want anything to go wrong because you've got it already figured out, you're just not going to be able to do it. And so agile planning means it's much more iterative. It's often, we ask our clients, how far out can you see? It might be a month, it might be 2 months. That might be too long right now. I don't know. But what you're doing is you are planning, adjusting, planning. It's a cycle. The other thing I will say here on that is, if you are someone, if in your planning meetings with your teams, if you're spending all your energy saying, Melanie, did you get your stuff done? Did you get this done? Is it complete? Okay, important. We want to get the stuff done. But what we really want to do is think of, what did we learn last month? What did our experiment tell us? What changes do we need to make? That's the richness of agile planning. So very important. The last one I want to emphasize, this is a picture here from Hidden Figures, great movie. And they learned their way through it, right? The space program. The thing I want to say to you is all of us that are on this call probably have been successful. We have some experience. And when that happens, people tend to expect you to have answers. Therefore, you have them always. And this can actually work against you. So if you are that person that thinks, I have to have all the answers, you're bringing out your answers from your 2016 playbook and using them here and now, probably isn't going to work. So you have to feel more comfortable saying, this is something we need to learn. Who knows more about this? Being able to figure it out as you go, learn as you go, and don't let that I have to have all the answers get in your way. The other thing I will say, the most basic thing we all know is listening. Back to what we've been talking about today. Where are people on the change curve? How are they feeling? You cannot know that unless you are working with Melanie on predictive index to get some of that data, which is great, and listening, talking to people. It is the most, in addition to experimentation, highly underutilized in business. And listening is one of the ways you learn. Anybody that's a great, curious, lifelong learner, I would ask you to think of that person, picture them. They are also somebody who's probably a great listener and absorbing a lot of new information. So I would encourage you, those are my 4 tips on strategies to be a change leader in these ambiguous times. And I hope they will maybe get you thinking as you start setting your goals of what you want to do and what you want to learn after taking the PI or whatever it is you have at your disposal to start to say, what can I do to feel better in these times and make progress?
Yeah. So much wrapped up in those 4 strategies that
Yes.
we could have a whole session and just
Good.
leave the slide up here and talk the entire time, right?
Yes.
I do have one quick question for you before we close out that I would assume a lot of people want to know, but here's Rachel. So maybe she has a question. Hi, Rachel. Oh, we can't hear you, Rachel. You're on mute.
So sorry. I want to say we've gotten some great audience participation questions, and I'd love to run a few of them by you.
Sure.
We'll still have some
Absolutely.
time.
Let's do it.
All right. So first off, here we go. In a remote work environment, do you have any specific tips to keeping productivity while staying attentive to your employees' mental and emotional well-being?
I'll give a couple, and Melanie, if you want to add to them. I think you have to think about, I think that's a great question because you need to think about both tracks. So I would say on the remote working emotional well-being, you don't have the hallway conversation anymore. You don't have the informal, of, God, Rachel doesn't seem herself today. How are you doing? It's much harder. So I know one of the things that we advise our clients to do is things that you normally, for an efficient person, you would think of as fluff, is allow time on calls for some conversation. Encourage people to have more one-on-one check-ins. We do virtual happy hours, we do virtual lunches sometimes with no agenda. Things that you might normally, you efficiency people out there might feel like, I don't know about it. I would say do that. I think also working virtually, if you haven't been doing it, it just requires trust. It also requires that you focus less on how many hours are you working and are you getting your stuff done. And interim check-ins. It's due on Friday. Let's check in on Wednesday and see how you're doing. Those kinds of strategies. But I love that question because you're thinking about both the personal connection with people as well as, are we getting the work done that we need to get done? I hope that helps. Something to think about.
I think that's fantastic. A few things I would add would be, I love what Patti said about the more frequent check-ins. The one thing I've learned to keep in mind is adjust them as you go, because there may be times you need to pick them back up again. And then there may be times they're fatiguing people and they're not being effective and you need to lessen them. So I've seen some teams think because they started every day having one at the beginning of all this, they're still doing it. And I have team members reaching out to me going, oh, this is painful and I don't want to do this anymore, but they don't feel like they can speak up. So keep that in mind. We do a lot of breakouts. If you're in a group, like at the very beginning of remote working, like have a breakout for 5 minutes to level set. Where are you today? Give yourself a number between 1 to 10 and let them talk in a smaller group, because those people that don't draw their energy from, being in big groups will open up potentially with someone, one-on-one. Don't accept a lack of commitment in a remote environment. It is one of the worst destroyers of teams. And we work a lot around commitment with teams, but in virtual environments, it is so much more common for someone to go, and their face is tight and you see they're not bought in. Like Patti said, you can't grab them as you're walking out and say, hey, Melanie, your face looked kind of tight. Tell me what's going on. Help me understand. What are you thinking? What input do you have? So we've got to be more focused in a remote environment, soliciting feedback, and then you champions, building time into your meetings to ask for feedback. You tend to, at least me, fill the agenda with what I want to get done, and really watching the clock to ensure you ask for input.
I'm going to add one more thing to that, and that is I'm on Zoom. It feels like all day, and I get Zoom fatigue. I know you all do too. One of the things that's very important is designate which meetings they're all in virtual, right? We're not going to have half the team on Zoom and then the other half, they're not physically present, they're called in. That's very distracting. You don't have to do that for all of them, but say, okay, this is an all-in meeting. So we don't care if your hair's in a pigtail, and you've got, we don't care, just join, So that's another tip, because it can be very frustrating on that connection point if you can see half the people, but the other people are like, are you listening? Are you on? So something else to add to it. Any time for any more questions?
Yeah, well, I have another quick one. How do you deal with bosses who are not change magnets? Because a boss can sometimes be the hardest resistor.
I think one of the best strategies I have seen is back to experimentation. Is don't ask your boss to stay with it. Be persistent, but don't ask them to take a bigger leap than they will take, because you'll get a no. So experimentation can be a small step. Would you be willing to try blank? What if we did this? And start, because often bosses in general, some positive momentum and results and some positive word of mouth can also help make your case. So it's not you just going, you need to do it, need to do it, need to do it. So that's my quickest tip, I would say.
I think too, it's helping them reflect back to their successes. So, you want to get the brain in a positive place to see possibility. So even people wired in the past and where they draw their confidence, we want them to start thinking about where they've had success in the past. So if you have a boss that's not necessarily embracing change right away, maybe schedule some time to talk with them about some things that you're interested in changing, but first start by asking questions around changes you remember that have happened, and ask them how they navigated that, so that you're allowing that brain to start seeing possibility before you start asking about some changes that maybe they're not comfortable with right now.
Also, beware of words, loaded words that will trigger. It's like we have one of our clients, and in one situation we had a leader, we knew they needed, before even COVID, we needed to take some of these learning programs virtual. And we said, what about if we just did virtual programs? Well, just the word virtual in his mind, he had a history, right, of people calling in, and it wasn't until we started to show him, yeah, that actually looks really different than what you experienced 2 years ago, and let's look at that. So beware of code that people trigger something very different than maybe what you're intending. So how you communicate and the words you use, super important.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such an insightful session. So many people in the chat have really taken a lot to internalize, and for everyone that's joined us, we will be sending out a recording to all the gold and VIP ticket holders. So if you wanted to view this again, also again, a link to the assessment, if you this is predictive index assessment after this. And then just finally, Melanie and Patti, thank you for joining us today and providing your insight. Any last words you want to share?
No, I think we're just, we had so much fun getting to do this together. You can see where to contact both of us. We're going to be sending out a summary of the tips that were provided so that you can take action immediately on these things. And both Patti and I have a blog, and Patti has her amazing book there. Patti, any closing thoughts from you?
No, just get started. Try
Yeah.
some new things. We hope that this will be kind of that, give you just that nudge and confidence to try something new and, you know, step into the change. We both wish you all good things as we all manage through these crazy times. So thank you so much for participating.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all, and we will.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.